Okay, let's just dive right in. We are going to unpack a secret meeting, really a philosophical showdown that happened back in November 1676.
Right. And this was a meeting between two absolute titans of thought, two men who you could argue really set the terms for the modern world.
And it all went down in a small rented room in The Hague. This is a confrontation that was, both deeply personal and completely world-changing.
Pitting two figures against each other who could not have been more different. You have Baruch Spinoza, the heretic.
And on the other side, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the ultimate courtier.
The contrast is just...
Right.
It's incredible. And it's really the heart of this whole story.
It is. So Spinoza is the saintly revolutionary. This is the man who was excommunicated, who lives this, almost unbelievably austere life.
Just grinding lenses for telescopes to make ends meet. Meticulously.
Meticulously. And then you have Leibniz. He's the ambitious polymath, the systems builder, always, and I mean always, dressed to the nines.
Oh, absolutely. The latest Parisian fashion, the silk stockings, the enormous wig. He was performing success at all times. He was aiming for the grandest courts in Europe.
And their relationship, professionally, it's just this masterpiece of intellectual deception?
Duplicity, I think, is the word. Publicly, Leibniz is just, he's scathing. He calls Spinoza's work horrible, terrifying.
He said it was an intolerably impudent threat that would basically tear down all of Christian civilization.
Exactly. But then you look at his private papers, his notebooks.
And he's obsessed.
Completely obsessed. He's cramming them with detailed critiques, commentaries on Spinoza's, forbidden ideas. He can't get enough.
And he's writing to him in secret, addressing him. And you have to wonder if this is sarcasm or just genuine awe as celebrated doctor and profound philosopher.
It's probably a bit of both. He's even pleading, secretly through friends, to get a look at the manuscript for Spinoza's masterpiece, the Ethics, which wasn't even published yet.
He needed to see the enemy's battle plans.
He had to know exactly what he was up against.
And so we get to the meeting itself. Leibniz, this man of status, travels all the way to The Hague for this one specific purpose.
And he stays for at least 3 days. They talked, as he later put it, many times and at great length.
Which he later, of course, tried to minimize.
Right. He tried to spin it as if he just stopped in for a few hours to swap anecdotes.
So our mission in this deep dive is to get past that spin. We want to unpack the lives, the philosophies, and understand why one of these men became the symbol of rational, secular modernity.
And the other became the brilliant architect of the reactive response. The philosophy designed to save God, to guarantee security, purpose, and morality.
We're really unpacking how these two lives, born into such wildly different circumstances, came to define the choice that, we still face.
Yeah.
A choice about God, about freedom, and really about the whole purpose of being human.
Okay, but to do that, you have to set the stage. Because the 17th century is not just a backdrop, it's a character in this story.
Right. We call it the century of genius, which it was, but it was also just dominated by glitter and strife.
An incredible description. You have this explosion of new science, calculus, microscopes, telescopes, all being born at the exact same time as these unbelievably devastating religious wars, civil wars, revolutions.
It's an age of massive urban growth and global trade, but it's also shadowed by, epic plagues, the Great Fire of London, this deep, pervasive spiritual anxiety.
The world felt like it was simultaneously racing forward into the light and collapsing into total chaos, depending entirely on where you were standing.
And where you stood, where you were born, that trauma, it defined everything for these two. Let's start with Leibniz's world. Germany, just decimated by the 30 Years' War.
Leibniz was born in 1646. That's just 2 years before the war finally ended. And you have to get your head around the scale of that catastrophe to understand him.
This wasn't just a war. It was an apocalypse for the German states.
It was. The population, which was around 21 million when it started, by the end, it was down to just 13 million.
From 21 million to 13 million.
A loss of 8 million people.
That's a ratio of destruction. That's worse than what we saw in the world wars of the 20th century.
Far worse. And that kind of trauma, that collective memory of total collapse, it seeps into the philosophy. It creates this deep, almost instinctual craving for order, for peace, for security, at any cost.
So every intellectual is asking, how do we stop this from ever happening again?
That is precisely Leibniz's mission. His entire life's work for 5 decades was about rebuilding a vanished order.
Yeah.
He's trying to reunite the Protestant and Catholic churches, trying to reconcile ancient philosophy with modern science.
He's trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
He's trying to restore the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, his whole project is to build a system, philosophically and politically, that guarantees stability and purpose.
So his thinking is born from this profound societal insecurity, a search for a kind of paternal order that had been just violently destroyed.
Now, you contrast that with Spinoza's world, the Dutch Golden Age.
It's the complete opposite. It's the anti-Germany of the 17th century.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a nation literally engineered from land below sea level by a tiny population of only 2 million people. And yet
it becomes the global economic and cultural superpower of its time.
Amsterdam, where Spinoza grows up, is the center of world trade. It's admired everywhere for its wealth, its fanatical cleanliness,
Its low crime rate, and most importantly for our story, its extraordinary freedom.
and this is the key point. Tolerance in the Dutch Republic wasn't some, fuzzy idealistic concept.
No, it was a business model.
It was enlightened commercial self-interest. Spinoza's own family were Portuguese Jews, conversos who had fled the Inquisition.
Right, so these are refugees from fanatical intolerance.
And they arrive in Amsterdam, and they bring their money, their skills, and crucially, their global trade networks.
And the Dutch authorities are smart enough to realize that this is a good deal.
A very good deal. By the middle of the century, the Jewish community accounts for something like 15% of Amsterdam's entire foreign trade. So the authorities figured out that freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry, freedom of speculation, that's what fuels the whole machine.
It fuels the science, the art. I mean, Rembrandt is living just a few doors down from Spinoza's family.
And it fuels the philosophy, which is the most dangerous part.
So the Dutch Republic becomes Spinoza's laboratory. It's a living experiment showing that the old theocratic rules that had persecuted his family for generations were failing.
And a new secular order, based on reason and liberty and self-interest, was actually flourishing.
Which sets the stage for him to take that freedom to its absolute logical and terrifying conclusion.
Which brings us to Baruch Spinoza himself, the ascetic revolutionary, the heretic.
And that family history as conversos is so important. These are descendants of Jews who were forced to convert to Christianity in Spain and Portugal.
They're practicing their faith in secret for generations, always under threat. So when they finally get to Amsterdam, where they can practice openly, they have this first-hand visceral understanding of what religious intolerance does to people.
His father was a successful merchant, trading sugar and wine. Young Baruch, or Bento, was being groomed to be a leader in this prosperous community. And he was, by all accounts, an unbelievable prodigy.
His first biographer says that by the time he was 15, Spinoza was already raising theological difficulties that the most learned among the Jews found it difficult to solve. He wasn't just learning, he was stress-testing the foundations.
But then his life is just completely derailed by a series of tragedies.
It's brutal. He loses his mother when he's young. And then between his mid-teens and age 21, his entire immediate older family, his father, his brother, his sister, his stepmother, they all die.
He's left alone to run the family business.
A business which is now rapidly going bankrupt. They lose huge cargoes to the English Royal Navy in one of the Anglo-Dutch wars and more to Barbary pirates. The whole thing collapses.
So the path he was on, wealthy merchant, maybe a respected rabbi, that's just gone.
And that upheaval, that loss, it actually frees him up in a way. It pushes him away from commerce and deeper into the world of books, which leads him to a man named Frans van den Enden.
Ah, the bad boy of the Dutch Enlightenment.
That's him, an ex-Jesuit, a radical Democrat, and a man who was openly accused of sowing these seeds of atheism in his students. Spinoza goes to him to learn Latin, the language of modern philosophy, and he just immerses himself in Descartes.
And in Descartes, he finds the tool he needs, the acid test. Nothing should be accepted as true unless it can be proven by good and solid reasons.
And he takes that tool and applies it not just to science, but to scripture, to the foundations of his own faith.
And he quickly realizes that almost none of it holds up to that standard of rational proof.
The crisis point comes when a couple of men pretending to be his friends basically trap him. They press him to share his real, private thoughts.
And Spinoza, being Spinoza, with his radical commitment to honesty, he tells them.
And the ideas are just. They're philosophical dynamite in the 17th century.
He suggests that God might actually be a physical thing, a body, because greatness requires extension.
He dismisses spirits as phantoms and argues that the word soul in the Bible just means life. It offers no proof at all of personal immortality.
That's the real threat, isn't it? Denying the immortal soul. That takes away the ultimate power of the religious authorities.
It dismantles their entire claim to authority over the next life. The community leaders, understandably, they panic,
And they try to buy his silence. They offer him 1,000 guilders
which is an enormous amount of money. Enough to commission 6 portraits from Rembrandt.
just to publicly recant and, play along.
And he refuses, flat out. He says he wouldn't be a hypocrite for any price. When his old mentor, Rabbi Mortera, confronts him, furious and heartbroken.
Spinoza's response is just ice cold and calm. He tells the assembled elders, I am quite willing to show you how to excommunicate me.
The herem, the formal excommunication, is pronounced in 1656. The curse is horrifying. It condemns him, forbids anyone from even being in the same room with him.
But his reaction tells you everything. He's serene. He says, I enter gladly on the path that is open to me. He saw himself as a double exile.
A Jew to the Christians, and now a heretic to the Jews. He was completely outside the system.
And that's what gave him the perspective to see it so clearly. To see that the old God was dying, that theocratic rule was obsolete.
He becomes this heretic with the character of a saint, a man of incredible moral rigor, but completely outside a religious framework. You see it in his lifestyle, the famous Spinoza unit.
All right, let's nail this down. How does he live? He makes his living grinding lenses for microscopes and telescopes.
Which was highly skilled work. The great scientist Christian Huygens praised him, saying, the Israelite achieves an admirable polish.
It was also deadly work. The fine glass dust he was breathing in all day, it aggravated the lung disease that eventually killed him at just 44.
But it gave him what he valued most: independence. He refused all offers of patronage.
His austerity was legendary. He lived in tiny rented rooms. The inventory of his possessions after he died is it's heartbreakingly short.
2 pairs of pants, 7 shirts.
His one luxury was a 4-poster bed he'd inherited from his parents.
His diet was just gruel, raisins, maybe some milk soup. And when a friend offered him a generous annuity of 500 guilders.
He refuses it. He insists it be lowered to 300 guilders a year.
300 guilders. That is the Spinoza unit. The precise amount he calculated he needed for total intellectual independence. Not a penny more.
He would not be beholden to anyone. And that asceticism, it's paired with this revolutionary self-image.
Right. He loved to sketch. And among his belongings, they found a self-portrait.
The Masaniello portrait. This is amazing. The quiet lens grinder saw himself as Masaniello, the Neapolitan fisherman who led this violent, bloody, short-lived revolt against Spanish rule.
What that tells you is that under the serene logic, under the quiet lifestyle, Spinoza saw himself as the leader of a global revolution.
Not a violent one.
No, a revolution of the mind. A revolution against all theocratic order, all arbitrary power. He was a revolutionary who believed that reason alone was the weapon that would change the world.
That's incredible. If Spinoza is defined by rejecting all external authority, then our other subject, Gottfried Leibniz, is defined by a deep, profound, lifelong need to find it.
Exactly. We shift now to the Courtier, the ambitious synthesizer. And for Leibniz, the defining event happens when he's just 6 years old.
So father, please.
His beloved doting father. And he later admitted that this loss left him with this bottomless hunger for paternal affirmation and, just as importantly, for financial security. That neediness defines everything about him.
It's an insecurity that drives his intellectual ambition. Unlike Spinoza, who kind of hid his genius, Leibniz desperately needed to shine.
He was a staggering prodigy, fluent in Latin at 12, writing these epic poems at 13. But every achievement was a performance, a way to get validation.
And then he suffers this huge public rejection early in his career. The University of Leipzig denies him his doctorate because he's too young.
It was a massive slap in the face, and he doesn't just accept it. He leaves town immediately and dedicates himself to living by his wits and chasing patrons.
He gets his first job in the most Leibniz way possible. He becomes the secretary for a society of alchemists in Nuremberg.
Not because he believed in alchemy,
but because he wrote this brilliant, complex parody of their work and they mistook it for genius.
It's the perfect Leibniz story. He understood that success is about performance, about believability. He was trained as a lawyer, and he approached philosophy like a legal brief.
The goal wasn't necessarily absolute truth.
No, the goal was to make a believable case, to defend your client, and his main client was God and the established social order.
Which earned him a nickname among the local villagers in Hanover, didn't it?
It did. They called him Leibniz, which means, roughly, believer in nothing. They saw a man who could argue any side with dazzling brilliance, but they suspected the core conviction just wasn't there.
And this need to be seen, to be affirmed, it shows up in his appearance. He wasn't a physically impressive man.
No, he was small, hunched. One person cruelly said his limbs were as crooked and ungainly as those of Charon.
The ferryman of the dead.
Ouch. Yeah. And yet he adopts the highest of high fashion in Paris.
The wig, the vest, the silk stockings. He's performing his status. He's making a visual argument. I belong in the highest circles.
And this brings us back to our metric. If Spinoza's material needs were 300 guilders a year, the Spinoza unit.
Leibniz needed about 3,300 guilders a year to maintain his lifestyle.
The Leibniz unit, we have to remember that ratio. One Leibniz unit equals 11 Spinoza units. The Courtier required 11 times the affirmation of the heretic.
And that grand need translates into his intellectual projects, the omnimania, as it's been called. His interests were just boundless.
He wasn't just a philosopher, he wanted to be the universal fixer. He's inventing symbolic logic to end all arguments, building calculating machines, designing submarines.
And his political schemes were just as grand. The Egypt Plan of 1671.
This is a classic. He devises this incredibly elaborate plan to convince Louis XIV to divert his massive army away from Germany and instead go conquer Egypt.
A new crusade?
It was a masterstroke of self-promotion. It would solve German security, unite Europe, and
it would make Leibniz famous and rich in Paris, the city he called the most knowledgeable and powerful in the universe.
Louis XIV was not impressed. He famously said that holy wars had gone out of fashion since the 9th century.
So the plan fails, but Leibniz still gets to Paris. He spends his glory years there, from 72 to 76, and that's where he invents calculus.
All the while he's chasing titles, awards, trying to bring his metaphorical ship into port. He accumulates wealth, but that anxiety, that fear of instability born from his father's death, it never goes away.
And that's the great contradiction, isn't it? This man who is perpetually anxious about his status and his income
is the same man who will build a magnificent philosophical system proving that this world we live in is mathematically and logically the best of all possible worlds.
How does that work? How does a man so worried about everything argue that everything is perfect? That's the question that brings us right to their meeting. November 1676.
Leibniz travels to The Hague for one reason: to meet Spinoza. He's there for at least 3 days, having these deep, long conversations.
A fact he spends the rest of his life trying to cover up.
Right. He tries to pretend it was nothing, just a quick stop. But we have the proof from his own archives, the single most telling piece of evidence from that visit.
What's that?
The one document we know he wrote while he was there. It's titled, "That a Most Perfect Being Exists." It's a formal ontological proof of God's existence.
So he wrote out a proof for God and then read it to Spinoza.
That's what the evidence suggests. You have to picture it. Leibniz, in his silks and his wig, in this tiny, austere room with the lens laid in the corner, reading a proof that God is a willful, choosing being to the man who said God is just nature.
And this is where the confrontation becomes existential for Leibniz. He sees Spinoza's life. He sees the quiet dignity, the moral rigor, the complete lack of vice.
And it shatters the stereotype. The 17th century assumption was that an atheist had to be a decadent, a monster. But Spinoza was living a more virtuous life than most Christians.
Leibniz realized he knew too much. He was confronted with the actual living consequence of radical self-sufficiency, and it wasn't monstrous, it was serene.
And that encounter forces him to spend the rest of his life building a system that is an explicit, point-by-point refutation of Spinoza.
Okay, let's break that down. Spinoza's God is dosiv natura, God or nature.
God is the immanent cause of everything. God isn't a creator sitting outside the universe. God is the universe and all of its laws.
And the consequence of that is just mind-bending. If God is nature, then there's only one substance. Everything that happens out of necessity.
Spinoza says the world could not have been made in any other way than it is. There's no divine choice, no contingency, just brutish necessity.
And if there's no choice, there's no purpose. The universe isn't heading towards some goal, it just is.
For Spinoza, your mind is just the idea of your body. Freedom isn't about choosing what you want. Freedom is about understanding the necessary causes that make you want it.
So happiness is this intellectual love of God, which means accepting that necessity. You're free when you understand the chains of cause and effect that bind you.
And that is what Leibniz found so dangerous. That kind of determinism, for him, it just erases moral accountability. It eliminates any host of personal immortality. It turns God into a machine.
It's a threat to the entire Christian moral framework.
Absolutely. So he has to build this massive Baroque intellectual fortress to keep that idea out. His God must have both intellect and will. His God must choose.
The best of all possible worlds.
Exactly. Leibniz imagines God contemplating an infinite number of possible universes and, because God is perfect, choosing to create the very best one.
And that act of choosing is what rescues purpose and morality from Spinoza's purposeless machine.
But then he has a problem. How do you guarantee individual freedom and immortality if everything is still part of God's perfect plan? That's where he invents the monadology.
Which, to a modern ear, sounds like something out of science fiction. What on earth is a monad?
A monad comes from the Greek word for unity. For Leibniz, monads are the basic building blocks of reality. They're these infinite, indestructible, individual points of spiritual substance.
And crucially, they are windowless.
Windowless, meaning they cannot causally interact with each other at all.
So they're completely self-contained. How does that help him fight Spinoza?
It guarantees individuality. If monads can't interact, they can't all merge together into one single divine substance like in Spinoza's system. Every person, every rock, every star is a unique collection of these immortal spiritual atoms.
But if they're all isolated, how does anything happen? How does the universe look like it works?
This is the ingenious part. The doctrine of pre-established harmony. God, in choosing the best of all possible worlds, pre-programmed every single monad from the beginning of time to run in perfect synchronicity with every other monad.
So they're like millions of clocks, all set to the same time, but never actually touching each other.
Precisely. The appearance of cause and effect is just an illusion created by God's perfect harmonious design.
It is an incredible intellectual machine built for the sole purpose of blocking Spinoza's argument.
And yet that argument, that ghost of Spinoza, haunted him for the rest of his life. He spent decades fighting these proxy wars against anyone he thought was a secret Spinozist.
Who were his main targets in these proxy wars?
Well, his first target was Descartes. Years later, Leibniz would attack him, saying Descartes' ideas lead straight to the sentiments of Spinoza. He thought Descartes left the door open for Spinoza's materialism.
And then John Locke.
Oh, he went after Locke mercilessly. He accused Locke of being a crypto-Spinozist just for suggesting that maybe the soul wasn't necessarily immaterial.
And then, of course, the biggest fight of all was with Isaac Newton over the invention of calculus.
That wasn't just about who got there first. It was a theological war. Leibniz accused Newton of promoting heretical ideas that belonged to another philosopher, wink, wink meaning Spinoza. He used Spinoza as a boogeyman to discredit all his rivals.
He even saw Spinoza's ghost in China.
He did. He was fascinated by Chinese philosophy, saw it as a kind of laboratory. He liked the good Chinese philosophers whose idea of lie, this universal principle, seemed a bit like his monadology.
But he also saw a danger there.
A huge danger. He worried about the bad Chinese philosophers who interpreted lie as just a universal, impersonal, mechanical force.
Which leads right back to
brutish necessity. He explicitly said that this interpretation followed even the opinions of Spinoza. He saw the same intellectual threat popping up all over the world.
It's almost exhausting the amount of energy he spent building this firewall. And the great irony is that his own system, his monadology,
it often collapses into something that looks exactly like Spinozism.
How so?
Well, critics pointed out that if God pre-programs every monad to act in perfect harmony in the best of all possible worlds, then where's the freedom? The universe is just as deterministic as Spinoza's. Leibniz gets tied in knots trying to explain the difference between moral necessity and metaphysical necessity.
So in trying to slam the door on Spinoza, he kind of found himself already on the other side.
But the biggest paradox isn't in his philosophy, it's in his life.
Right. He preaches this philosophy of divine purpose and charity.
But his day-to-day life is pure Spinozism. It's all about the pursuit of self-interest. Scrambling for money, chasing patrons, political maneuvering. He acted like a Spinozist while trying to build a world that would disprove Spinoza.
It's amazing. In his final years, the man who wrote the best of all possible worlds doctrine was living this frantic, anxious life.
He was struggling to finish this genealogy for his patron, the Duke, who clearly thought he was this old-fashioned buffoon, calling him a living dictionary.
This brilliant man was terrified of being poor. He's haggling over his salary, complaining constantly that he feels he would be crushed one day.
That lifelong complaint, that deep insecurity, it's just this heartbreaking counterpoint to his optimistic philosophy. The system he built to give himself security couldn't actually soothe his own mind.
And this really gets to their legacy. They are the twin founders of modern thought, but they represent this fundamental split in how we respond to modernity.
Spinoza gives us the foundation for the modern, secular, rational state. It's about self-sufficiency, reason, and accepting necessity.
While Leibniz spends his life defending the moral core that so many of us still rely on, the sanctity of the individual, the idea of purpose, of choice, of justice.
It's like Nietzsche said, great philosophy is an involuntary memoir. Leibniz's whole system is a reflection of his own bottomless need for security and affirmation from some kind of father figure.
And Spinoza's ethics is a reflection of his own eerie self-sufficiency, his total rejection of external validation in favor of rational virtue.
What Leibniz saw in that room in 1676 was a man who had accepted the reality that terrified him most, the reality of necessity and self-interest, and had somehow found peace in it.
He saw that his own anxious life was actually a perfect illustration of Spinoza's philosophy in action.
And so he spent the rest of his life building a philosophical God who would love us back, a system that would provide the reassurance he craved. Spinoza found happiness in loving nature through reason.
And Leibniz tried to find happiness in the belief that God loves us back, that our choices matter, that there's a grand purpose.
They're two completely different paths to tranquility.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. Spinoza's path requires that radical self-sufficiency, the 300 guilder unit, and the acceptance of necessity. Leibniz's path requires that guaranteed affirmation, the 300 guilder unit, and the promise of transcendent purpose. What does the choice between those two forms of happiness tell you about your own quest for meaning in this world? Which philosopher's room do you find yourself sitting in today?